Hi everybody, welcome to today's spag lesson. It is Tuesday the 2nd of February 2021. Where did January go? That went very quickly. And today, well, in fact, all of this week, we are going to be doing something a little bit different in each spag lesson. And the reason for that is because it's really useful sometimes to remember things that you learned about in the past and just keep them in your memory. So today, we're going to be revising clauses, and we're going to be looking at the difference between a main clause and a subordinate clause, which is something we have done before in school. So I want you to have a really good try and hopefully you'll remember it really well. So please pause the video and write your date and your learning objective in your home learning book. And if you've got a ruler at home, I'd like you to underline it as neatly as you can, just so that your home learning looks amazing, just like it does in school. Okay, pause the video for me. Okay, so we are going to be thinking about clauses today, and I am not talking about this guy over here. This is Santa Claus or Father Christmas, but not this kind of clause. We are talking about clause with an E on the end, okay? So this is Santa Claus, C-L-A-U-S, but we are talking about clauses in sentences. If you are in my class or in the other class at school that I sometimes teach, you will know how this sentence ends. Think about what might be behind that red box. A clause is basically a part of a sentence. A clause is a part of a sentence. And some sentences just have one clause, but especially now we're a bit older and we're able to add a little bit more detail to our sentences, you will probably be writing sentences like the one in red at the bottom, where there's more than one clause. So a clause is a part of a sentence, and there are two main types of clauses, or two types of clauses that we're going to talk about today, and they are main clauses and subordinate clauses. And there's one really easy peasy lemon squeezy way that you can tell the difference pardon me, between a main clause and a subordinate clause. So see if you can think about what might be behind that red box. It says, I can tell the difference between a main clause and a subordinate clause because subordinate clauses do not make sense on their own. Okay. If you read that sentence in red at the bottom of the screen, it says, even though it was sunny outside, I wore a jumper, a large jumper, and a thick pair of socks. So the bit that I've underlined, you're going to be asking yourself the question, does it make sense on its own? If I just get rid of the first part of the sentence, if I ignore this part and I just read the part that has been underlined, does it make sense on its own? So let's read it and see. It says, I wore a large jumper and a thick pair of socks. I think that makes sense on its own. And if it makes sense on its own, then it is a main clause. So that is what we are going to be thinking about today. I'm going to give you some sentences and you are going to decide whether I have underlined the main clause or the subordinate clause. So here is your challenge. You do not need to write out the whole sentence. You are just going to look at the part I have underlined. So we'll do the first one together. When it is cold, comma, I wear gloves. So you are going to look at the part I have underlined. It says I wear gloves. And you're going to ask yourself the question, does it make sense on its own? And if you think it does make sense on its own, without the rest of the sentence, then it must be a main clause. And if it does not make sense on its own, if it needs something else to help it make sense, then it must be a subordinate clause. So you do not have to write all the sentences out. All I want you to do is write MC if you think it's a main clause, or SC if you think it's a subordinate clause. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video for me whilst you complete all of those. And in a minute, I'm going to go through the answers so you can mark your own work. Pause the video for me here. Okay, so now you've had a go at that challenge, I'm going to go through the answers for you, and you can mark your own work. And don't forget to take a picture of your work and ask a parent or carer to email it to us, and we will make sure that you get your dojos for this lesson. So, when it is cold, comma, I wear gloves. So I'm going to read that bit that has been underlined, I wear gloves, and I'm going to ask myself the question, does it make sense on its own? I wear gloves. I think it does. So for this one, number 1, it was a main clause. We're just going to write MC. Number 2, I ate 7 cakes despite the fact that I am on a diet. Oh dear. The bit that's underlined says, despite the fact that I am on a diet. So that doesn't make sense on its own. So you should have had, it was a subordinate clause. Number 3, because he is such a naughty cat, Geoffrey stole Winston's dinner. The part that I have underlined says, because he is such a naughty cat. And you're waiting for me to say the next bit. So on its own, that does not make sense. So it must be a subordinate clause. So the answer to number 3 was SC. Number 4, when the baby was born, comma, she started crying. So we're just interested in the bit that has been underlined. And that does make sense on its own. If I ignore the rest of the sentence and just say, she started crying, that makes sense on its own. So it is a main clause. Well done if you got that one. And number 5, I am going to relax and read a book when the holidays start. So the bit that has been underlined says, I am going to relax and read a book. And that does make sense on its own. It doesn't need anything else to help it make sense. So it can stand alone, it can make sense on its own. So it is a main clause. And the last one, at the end of this lesson, comma, I will be amazing at using commas. So that does not make sense on its own. You need something else. You can't just say at the end of this lesson, because everyone will be like, what's coming next? So it doesn't make sense on its own. So it is a subordinate clause. Okay. So well done for completing this lesson. Don't forget to take a picture of your work and send it to us. I'm really looking forward to seeing your beautifully neat presentation in your home learning books. And I hope to see you all again tomorrow for another SPAG lesson. Bye.